That was their first double disqualification in their 75-year history.
If Max leaves or doesn't show up at a race, they are currently the 10th fastest team.
And you know what? They tasted amazingly exactly like cucumber.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the F1 show brought to you by Audi, where we're going to review an eventful Chinese Grand Prix weekend, the first sprint weekend of the new campaign, a victory, a first victory in a Ferrari for Lewis Hamilton, and a 1-2 on the Sunday for McLaren. This time, though, it was Oscar Piastri who took home the bacon. Joining me to discuss everything this week, Ted Kravitz and Bernie Collins. But we're going to start, guys, welcome, and guys and girls, I should say. We're going to start, if we could, though, with the terribly sad news that we heard on the Thursday morning it broke here in the UK, which would be Thursday evening for you out in China, the death of the legendary team owner, Eddie Jordan, at the age of 76. He'd been suffering from a very aggressive form of cancer, and unfortunately he passed away in Cape Town with his family by his side. We all knew Eddie. I'm not going to pretend I knew him as well as you, Ted, or potentially yourself, Bernie, but every time you met him, he was full of the joys of spring. He was just a wonderful, wonderful character. He did so much for the sport. And I wonder, just what was the feeling like in the paddock when the news broke, when you all arrived in on Friday, Ted? I'll start with you, because you obviously worked with him for a number of years and must have some very fond memories.
Yeah, Eej, what a ledge. And the feeling was still of shock, even though he telegraphed, he told us all on his, typically titled FFS podcast, which him and DC called Formula for Success. Is like, yeah, that's right. That's what it stands for. He'd said on there that, his cancer had spread to other parts of his body. And so while it was still a shock, even though it might not have been a surprise. And then the paddock kind of came to know to feel the magnitude of it, because there are so many people in Formula One who have their careers helped or started or influenced by Eddie Jordan. And in a sense, Formula One as it is now is a sort of byproduct of what he was campaigning for to help the independent teams back in when I first knew him, between in the 90s and 2000s. The first Eddie Jordan was always talking about how it doesn't make sense for this spending arms race for the big manufacturers and freezing out, making it impossible for the independent teams. We have to have some budgetary constraints. Well, he was right. He was really right. And he was a visionary in terms of what Formula One has turned out now with the budgetary restraints. And it's now much more of a level playing field. And then, people had stories inevitably of when they'd worked with him after. And I'd worked with him for 3.5 years at the BBC. And you just couldn't really go through the rest of the weekend without smiling. And that's the best tribute you could possibly have. Stories were traded, favorite stories, sayings, what would have happened when, if he'd done this, what would happen when he'd done that. And I just had some of his, words going around his thoughts going around in my head the whole weekend. Yeah. What a great man.
Yeah, what a great man. When you think about him, he's a racer himself. He did F3, F2. I think he competed in the 24-hour of Le Mans. And then he started Jordan, didn't he, in 1991, Bernie, which eventually he sold in 2005, became a kind of Midland Spiker, then Force India, then into the Racing Points, and now to Aston Martin. Obviously, you were part of that team in its different iteration, if you like. One of the guys, though, that was there from the start, and one of his closest friends, Andy Stevenson, who for years has been the sporting director there. I spoke to him about it, and he's, when he shared stories about EJ when he first started, and he really did start a fresh-faced kind of teenager there at Jordan, and Eddie was like, no, and you're not coming to work for me, no, to start with, because he really wanted to test him. He only wanted people that would really want to work for him, and Andy Stevenson did. He's still there, still going strong, but those two were pretty tight. He made some very good friends and was an incredibly loyal person. That's the one thing that I kind of knew about EJ. He was exceptionally loyal, wasn't he?
Yeah, and I think when the mark of people always say lovely things, unfortunately, when the worst is happening, when we've lost someone. But even when you spoke to people in the weeks previous to this and the races previous to this, people generally spoke really highly of Eddie. Everyone spoke with a smile on their face. Like Ted said, there was always a funny story. And actually, that's a real mark of a person when someone, instantly when you ask about them, just smiles, and that's, I think, a lot of what was happening in the paddock this weekend. There was a lot of chat and people reminiscing. I think that team in particular, there's quite a few people there that were there in the early Jordan days. And a lot of those people, it took it quite hard. And then I think that there was, from the Irish background, there's such a big following in Ireland, people who got into F1 because of Eddie Jordan, people who are aware of the Jordan team and followed that success and things. So, he's a huge, huge loss to the sport. And I think, like Ted said, it is a shock to everyone. It was a shock to everyone. And that sort of, it's weird how these things sort of filter through the paddock, this sort of wave of discussion and person to person and have you heard this or that. And and a little mark of that weekend, I think the Aston Martin team did an amazing job with what they put on the car, the remembrance of Eddie that they put on the car so quickly overnight. Basically, they drew it up, they got it printed out, they got it stuck on the car for Friday practice. So that was really lovely, and I think that'll make it's quite a nice way to remember it.
It was a lovely bit of design because it was the logo from Jordan Grand Prix, wasn't it? Or Eddie Jordan Racing in Formula 3 with a little heart, the Shamrock logo with the heart at the top. And the typeface, sorry to get technical for a sec, the typeface was half between the original Eddie Jordan Racing. In fact, I think it was the typeface of Eddie Jordan Racing in Formula 3. But it kind of looked a bit like the Aston Martin typeface as well. You say, Bernie, they did a great job, and we were just full of the sort of the stories of, even from Andy Stevenson to GP. He started at Jordan, did he not? And there are lots of mechanics at Alpine, formerly Renault, Red Bull. A lot of guys at Renault who started with EJ. And then the other sporting directors, Beat Zender, who was a sort of contemporary who would argue with him over things. So many sort of great stories of him around. So yeah, what a great lad. Really miss him.
Yeah, we all miss him. Yeah, towards the end of his life, wasn't he? He was sailing. He's sailing his boat everywhere around the world and spent a lot of time with Adrian Newey down in Cape Town managing him. But yeah, Eddie Jordan, he'll be sorely missed by everybody up and down the paddock, but no doubt he would have kind of been enjoying the start to this season as well and what it's providing. So let's move it into more positive stuff and to China as well. We've not been there. I mean, you went last year, didn't you, Ted? But I've not been there since 2019, obviously because of COVID. How's it changed? What's Shanghai like on the ground now?
Very busy, nice weekend, wasn't it, Bernie? The air was crisp and clear. The sun was out. Traffic is bad as usual, which is good because it means that there's lots of people going to and from work and lots of industries humming along and making things for the world. The automotive industry is huge there now, and the facility is still great. We didn't have any of the burning grass, the mysterious Chinese burning grass this year. Sparked by some of the skid blocks igniting on the dry grass, so we didn't have that. But yeah, it was great, wasn't it, Bernie? It was fine.
Nice to have a sunny weekend. Often in China we don't have so much of that. So nice sunny weekend mostly until we got to sort of Sunday post race. Traffic chaos in our little bus in and out of the track that we all get in it together. It just sort of feel like we spent quite a few hours this weekend just in a bus, but that's okay. That's part and parcel of the joy of racing, and all the teams and everyone who's working in the paddock does that to some degree. Our hotel was mega. That was really nice. And actually, it was weird. China in the past has sometimes not been that well attended. There's actually a lot of people in the grandstands, in the main grandstand on the grid on Sunday. There's a lot of people there. And in the paddock, there was people who travelled quite a distance. At one point, I bumped into a couple of ladies who came from Australia to China because they got into the paddock in China, I guess, through knowing someone where they wouldn't in Melbourne. So there was quite a few people there from various corners of the world that had chosen to come to China for the Grand Prix for the sprint weekend. So yeah, it was a busier paddock than it's been, or that at least I remember from 2019. So yeah, it was really nice.
Good. Well, might be on the plane next year. Let's see. Ferrari. Let's start. I mean, there's so many places we could start, but let's obviously start with the sprint. First sprint weekend, and a first victory in red from Lewis Hamilton. And without saying it was vintage Lewis, it was vintage Lewis basically, because he got into the clean air, having taken pole for sprint qualifying, and did what he was so good at during his time at Mercedes. When he's got clean air, managed those tyres terrifically. And and got the victory. Tell me about the elation there as well. I watched it obviously on catch up. Unfortunately, I was feeling too lazy to get up for that. Well, it wasn't even that early. I mean, a bit pathetic, but I did watch the repeat of that one. What was the feeling like? Did it feel like, right, okay, that is great. We've got that off our back straight away now. We can plough on, because it's a huge thing for him, wasn't it?
That after Australia and the sort of disappointment from Ferrari's side, it looked very different from, Lewis. His dad was in the paddock. They looked sort of buoyed by that result. I think it was they did really well in qualifying, and nice to get that win under wraps, but it went downhill from there potentially.
Well, I don't know. I mean, but he could have just stopped after Saturday and said, you know what, that's great. And I'm going to enjoy that. I'm not going to do Sunday. And the result would have been the same, because had they not shown up for Sunday, the result would have been exactly the same. But of course, they weren't going to do that because they thought there were more points on offer. But no, it was really important, Simon. He came into the weekend. It was good that it was a back-to-back in terms of rectifying what had been extremely disappointing Australian Grand Prix. But there were two things, really. Firstly, he was annoyed at the media coverage of the team radio back and forths with Riccardo Adami, and thought that they had been misinterpreted or clipped up and then played out to reflect something that wasn't the case. And it was just a normal back and forth towards him and his engineer, and suggestions he felt unfairly that there was an issue between them. He said that absolutely isn't an issue. And then he did the Max GP thing, didn't he? He went there with Lewis went there with you look at other drivers. He didn't mention Max, but we assumed that's who he was talking about. You look at other drivers who, haul their engineer over the coals on the radio a lot of the time, and you don't say anything about that. Of course, we do say something about that a lot of the time, and they explain it. We say, cool, that sounds pretty tetchy and passive aggressive between Max and GP, doesn't it? But they explain it as we have a great relationship, and it's like brother to brother. So, and it's fine. We explained then the relationship between Lewis and Riccardo Adami, who are just learning. So he was annoyed about that. So he said, I came into the weekend with some more aggression. And he came into the weekend with changing the car from what it was in Melbourne, which was sort of Ferrari engineering, what the setup simulator led, which might have its own issues. Bernie can elaborate that in a sec, into something that I tried in Bahrain that I was much more happy with. And I took that. I don't know what you thought, Bernie. I took that, seeing as they were the same wings, to be a sort of combination of suspension setup and sort of aero level. But he was just on it. He was completely on it on Saturday. Set the car up, and really won the sprint race. And I thought it was a critical moment. You know how I like to overplay things, Simon. But I thought it was a breakthrough. I really did. I thought it was a very significant moment. And in a way, I don't like all of this. And even from Ferrari and all the other teams, it's only a sprint race. And his celebrations were a bit muted, weren't they? He was like, woo, well done, everybody, woo. It's like, come on. Well, it's not just, I know it's just a sprint race. It's like, buy into it. It's important. It's an important moment.
It's amazing how quickly the weekend seems, because although obviously we've had a few days, we've flown back or whatever, that seems like quite a long time ago now. And like just thinking as you talk through it, we had the San Diego thing. Was that was for the sprint pole, wasn't it? Yep. There's so many things that happen in the weekend that it's almost very easy to forget about them now, just a few days later.
The Stay Classy reference. Yeah, it was an Anchorman reference. It wasn't to do with the pilgrimage, as Kamal, the German Sky Sports monitor man. Did you see that, Simon? Sky Sports Germany had their monitor man, Kamal, our friend, who thought that Santiago was a reference to the pilgrimage of Santiago de Compostela and how Lewis and Ferrari were somehow on some sort of pilgrimage together. Wasn't that? It turned out it was a Will Ferrell Anchorman reference.
I personally just thought, given all the controversies that have been about us interpreting radio from the week before, it was just, what can we say that's going to cause the most confusion amongst those of us that are listening to the radio? Just can we get them totally down a rabbit warren of radio transmissions? And, it was quite good. I like it. I like that idea.
Santiago de Compostela actually finishes on the coast at a place called Finisterre in Spain, where you go there and you burn your underwear at the end of the pilgrimage.
What?
When you do the Santiago de Compostela pilgrimage, I know this, my wife's done it.
Sure.
You go through Santiago de Compostela on the northern coast of Spain. You go through France, you go through the northern coast of Spain, and then you end in a place called Finisterre. Well, it's Fisterra, the Spanish word for that, where, as a mark of final pilgrimage, you burn all your underwear, which, let's face it, after a month walking on the road, that's all it's fit for.
Yeah. Get rid of all mine. He's getting rid of. Right, let's move it round to before we get into McLaren's wins. Let's get into Sunday, and as you rightly pointed out, Bernie, what a difference a day made for Ferrari. That's their first double disqualification in their 75-year history, and the fact that it was for two different technical infringements made it, I suppose, doubly galling for Fred and the rest of those dressed in red. Just to bring you up to date, I mean, Hamilton was disqualified for excessive plank wear. The skid blocks were worn down to 8.5 millimeters. The minimum there is 9 millimeters of thickness. So that's about what the width of a credit card, as Craig Slater was quite rightly pointing out on Sky Sports News the other day, with some poor unsuspecting identity card from one of the presenters. And then for Charles Leclerc and also for Pierre Gasly for being underweight. Minimum weight is 800 kilograms, and they were a kilogram under at 799. Now, when you couple that with what happened strategically in Australia, you start to think to yourself, this isn't what we're being expecting of this year. I know we touched on it in the last podcast, not what we're expecting of this kind of Vasseur era of Ferrari, these little mistakes. I know that these things can happen, but nevertheless they did, and they happened at the wrong time, and you can't just give up 61 points now that McLaren are leading the way by. You can't just give up that amount of points every week if you want to challenge for a constructors and a driver's title. So how impactful was all that?
Well, first of all, there's never a good time to have a double DNF. All the points that you gather at this position in the year become so crucial. You have no idea how crucial they will become towards the end of the year. There's quite a few things to dig into. Even if we disregard the disqualification, then the turnaround from sprint quali into main qualifying, quite significant for Ferrari. They were nowhere near as strong in main qualifying. So question mark as to what changed there, what they had to change in the car, what setup they tried, whatever, to go from winning the sprint on Saturday morning in China to then, not being anywhere near as strong in the main qualifying session. Interesting, I thought that was the first point. Yeah, the disqualification in the race. The plank were obviously the sprint on Saturday morning, the 19 laps that we did there, that's the best read they have all weekend on plank wear. They can then just extrapolate the 19 laps to see what they think the plank wear is going to be at the end of the race. When we look back to when that happened in Austin 2 years ago, you weren't allowed to change anything in the car between the sprint and the main race. So that's why some people got caught out. Now, in this era of regulations, you can change the plank. So put on a new one that's got the full skid blocks on, and you can change the ride height of the car in order to prevent the skid wearing what you think is over the legal limit. So it's a bit surprising to get caught out in that. It's not the same, I don't think, as what happened in Austin. But I think there was a lot more management in the sprint. There was a lot more management of that medium tyre, and the hard tyre, which nobody had run, allowed them to push a lot more. So maybe that's what led to more wear of that skid in the race. But it's a legal limit. So it's, there's no comeback from that. I think from Lewis's side, the disappointing thing is this is very early to build that trust, to build the confidence in your team at Ferrari, and you've had 2 races that haven't gone to plan. So you've had 2 sort of, it's like niggles, and it's just, if they can just continue to build that confidence and trust between team and driver going forward.
How big a problem do you think it is, Ted? Is it just one of those things they just got to regroup, get themselves ready for this triple header? It's just not ideal.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have wanted. He said it was a disastrous start in Australia, and this is going to leave a bit of taste in his mouth, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just wondering whether. So I had a chat with Fred Vasseur on Thursday. He was just hanging around by the TV pen, probably waiting for someone more important with an actual confirmed meeting time with Fred Vasseur. So I just went up to him and said, ça va, how are you doing? And kind of out of nowhere, he said, look, I think he said 2 things. First of all, Lewis's race performance in Melbourne was really compromised from not having a practice race in Bahrain testing, where we had a technical problem which stopped us doing the race. And then the second thing he said was about the team radio. He said, don't think this is a thing. It's not a problem. They're all absolutely fine. And so the first dry, I don't think it's insignificant, Simon, that where the plank wear thing happened on the first dry race. I think I have a feeling it's something carried over from Bahrain testing, where they didn't manage to do a race simulation, and the first dry race that Lewis has had was the Chinese Grand Prix, and then they discover this thing. And there was various stuff about having to raise the car up for the wet, or just raise it up anyway for Melbourne, and then they lowered it a bit. And of course, that's what we're talking here. If you have plank wear, it's because you're having to raise and lower the car in an unexpected way that's not been tested. So I think there's something to do there with the lack of sort of long run, heavy fuel, conclusive race simulations that they had, or rather didn't have, from Bahrain, and that's caught them out. Because they're too good a team and too clever a bunch of people to be caught out with excessive plank wear. Same with the weight. Whether that was the one stop with the tyres or something, or they were just running it a bit marginal. But, the sort of last 3 disqualifications we've had, Leclerc, Gasly and Russell, have been because of this weight thing with the tyres and a one stop. So that's why I can kind of understand that. What I think is a bit more, I think there's more of a story to it, which we'll probably never find out, or we will find out halfway through the season, is about this plank wear thing. But Simon, you know how I pride myself on being, Scoop McScoopface and investigative McCravitz. Did you like the way that I completely missed the investigation and the disqualifications in my notebook section of the program, which I'm sure you watched after?
You're assuming that I tuned in.
It turns out Scoopy McScoopface Kravitz here missed the 3 disqualifications that I was looking at straight in the face. So I've screen grabbed something from that. Go back to the notebook and watch the bit when I go outside the Ferrari garage after the McLaren photo. And then after the McLaren, the Ferrari garage, suddenly Fred Vasseur is there. And I say, there's Fred Vasseur talking to the chief engineer, Tognoli, the chief engineer. And what in my head did not make me think, hello, that's a bit odd. Why is Fred Vasseur suddenly, who's got better things to do at that time of night, not least going to the airport and getting his plane, standing looking at the Hamilton car? Why is he with the chief mechanic? And why is there an FIA guy in the garage looking at Lewis Hamilton's car? And why is Lewis Hamilton's car up on stands with someone looking at the plank? I'm such an idiot, Simon. Look, I've screen grabbed it. There you go. There is.
What do we do, Bernie? Bernie, do we mark him down for this? I mean, because actually weekly we should be giving the notebook a grade.
I had the story on the notebook and I did nothing with it. There's Fred Vasseur talking to the chief engineer. There's one FIA scrutineer. Yeah. There's the other FIA scrutineer in the white talking to the mechanic about, hello, I think your plank might be worn down here. And there's Hamilton's car on the stands with its plank being measured. Not only did I miss that story, Simon, but I also missed the fact that Gasly and Leclerc, cars were segregated in Parc Fermé, being measured for not being on the weight limit. There you go. Also a screenshot from the notebook. That's one Alpine, right? That's another Alpine there. with a scrutineer next to it being measured, and that's Leclerc's Ferrari. Sorry if you can't see it clearly, but my frustration with myself, I'm coming clean now on this.
Well, no, that's fair enough.
Well done.
That I missed. What an idiot I am. Why did I miss those big stories while I was looking at them, showing them on the Notebook? Go back and watch the Notebook on Sky Sports YouTube.
No,
I don't want
to now.
Watch me miss the two stories showing the disqualifications as they were happening.
No,
in the spirit of learning, I'm sure it will not happen again for the rest of the year.
It will not. It will not.
The one thing I noticed, which was unusual, and I've not quite figured it out, is walking from the podium, or where we were doing post-press at the podium, into the paddock. There was a Ferrari car in the pit stop position with mechanics around it, almost like testing the pit stop equipment, with an FIA guy there. So I don't know if they were having to prove that their pit stop system works to the regulation as well, if there's some question mark on that. Now, obviously, we've not heard anything, so I don't think there's anything to come of that. But I've not ever before seen a car in a pit stop position post-race, 4 guns out, 4 mechanics out, the lights down, checking. I think they were checking that when they press the gun, the light goes at the right time.
So were there more checks? Did Joe Bauer, the amiable FIA technical delegate, just wake up on Sunday morning and start China and thought, right, I'm going to check everything and everybody. I've got a feeling about this weekend. Do they always do those checks? And when they do it and they find 3 cars that are illegal, effectively, does the FIA and Joe Bauer think, yes, we've got them?
I think, well, in the same way that if you'd got them in the Notebook, you would feel a bit of success. I imagine Joe does feel successful when he gets them. But
yes, he does.
All of the cars get done for weight. So all of the cars get weighed at the end of the race. That is standard. So I think you would have definitely got the Ferrari and Gasly on that one. Not all get checked for plank wear. I think there was like 7 got checked for plank wear. So that they choose randomly. I'd say the document, I've not gone through all the numbers, I'd say it looked about the same as normal. But, you've got to feel like, yeah, I've got them on something. And then he's made a mark of his authority early in the race season, hasn't he? Don't mess with Joe Bauer.
The paddock policeman. Yeah, the paddock policeman. D- for this year, this episode of the Notebook training montage we should put together for you as he practices around the streets of Camden to get himself ready.
Lively missed the 3 scoop stories that I might have got live. And instead we had to reveal to ourselves on our bus, hour and a half bus ride back to the hotel. And we should have taken the metro, shouldn't we, Bernie? Actually, that's a lesson to us to use.
I did hear that the metro was very, very busy. Someone said it was like sardines getting in the metro. So at least I had not a lot of space, but I had a bit of space around me on the bus.
Well, I'm used to that. I know Victoria line, so that wouldn't have been a problem.
Yeah, exactly. Just one final one on Ferrari. Leclerc saying that he felt like he could have challenged McLaren for victory, but for that broken front wing is something that I've been reading subsequently. But his pace, nonetheless, with it was exceptional, wasn't it, Bernie?
Yeah,
with the damage to his car.
The front wing very much depends on who you speak to, because we interviewed Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri immediately after the race as part of our coverage, and just in jest they were like, well, it's a bit lighter and it's a flexible wing and it's bringing more downforce and all these things. And there was lots of discussion if it was legal, would people design a front wing without an end plate so it can get much closer to the floor? I think what we seen was that potentially through the initial laps there wasn't a degradation in performance, but the big thing is we don't know how fast Leclerc could have been with a proper wing, because we can't compare him to Lewis, because Lewis was slower anyway, I think, in that race in particular. So we don't have a compare of what the pace could have been. But one of the things I think that was a fallout of that was he had suffered quite badly with degradation at the end of the race. So that front left tyre was very important to try and keep that front left tyre in good condition. If you lose load on that corner, you slide that tyre a little bit more, which will hurt degradation. And towards the end of the race, he fell away, which is ultimately why Verstappen got him.
quick word on our show partner, Audi. The philosophy of Audi Sport isn't just about winning races. It's about pushing boundaries. Everything learnt on the track goes straight into Audi's road cars, making them just as thrilling as they are refined. Take the Audi RS range, serious performance, but with a level of sophistication and refinement that doesn't need to be loud to make a statement. It's that perfect blend of power and precision wrapped in quiet luxury. Whether it's their powerful style or the RS Sport suspension with Quattro all-wheel drive for razor-sharp handling, Audi is constantly redefining the future of performance. Book a test drive today to experience the Audi RS range for yourself. Let's get into the positives as well then. We've discussed Ferrari, and just to prove that I actually did watch your notebook, Ted, you'll be disappointed to know. When you went and talked to Tom Stallard, plan A and plan B, they were the two stops. Plan C, the one stop, that was the one that worked for them. And well done to Oscar Piastri, as I said, picking up his third victory. We like Tom, very pragmatic kind of race engineer, isn't he? And former Olympic silver medalist in the rowing. I wonder what kind of a win that was for the championship, because I think, Karun picked it. And we wondered about it. Karun said, I think that Oscar is absolutely going to give Lando a run for his money throughout the season. And I think that this showed that he's taken another step up. There was no doubt about it. That was, as much as Lando's was a statement win, and as much as, yes, he had problems with his brakes late on, in the brake pedal was going longer. The Aussie was, let's face it, Kimi Antonelli was not the driver of the day. The driver of the day was probably Oscar Piastri. Who am I to disagree with the fans? But, that was a great win, and he called it the most satisfying of the ones he's got so far.
Yeah, because he needed it. It was really needed. When he came into the weekend, my first question to Oscar was, championship's obviously on. You're in this to win the championship. You all of you in the top teams are. But from Melbourne, you're 23 points down. And if you do that with a few races to go, you think that's really difficult. So, what are you going to do about that type of thing? And he said, well, I'm going to very quick. I know I'm 23 points down after a pretty disastrous Australian Grand Prix, and I'm going to address that immediately. So he was in the mood to actually get going. Impressive qualifying. That's clearly something that's worked out with Stallard concentrating on that. Not having China as a kind of circuit where he was relatively fresh on compared to a lot of the others, didn't have quite as much experience. But in qualifying and in the race, got everything from the car, was just in control. So the bigger question maybe is, what happened to Lando? I mean, I know there's the no brakes thing towards the end, and that might have been even more galling had he been leading, had Lando done all the hard work and then been leading the race, and Oscar might have got him because he didn't have any brakes for the last couple of laps. That might have been more gutting than what was actually the case, which was Lando was off the pace. So why was Lando off the pace this weekend?
Yeah, well, so for me, I think when we look at, for example, I think it was Q1 and Q2, Lando was quicker in both of those sessions than Oscar was. Got slight mistakes in Q3, meant he didn't get the lap together, he didn't get the pole position, and we talked a lot over the weekend about how important clear air was. So there was times where if you just compare, a strategist likes to what we call theoretical pace, which is if you put your three best sectors together, who's the fastest driver. There was indications at a number of times that Lando Norris was quicker than Oscar Piastri on that metric. But in Q3, you have to get those three sectors together. And if you make a mistake, like we've seen the lock up into turn 14 or whatever, you throw away the lap. And you've only got 2 hits at it in Q3, or in sprint quali, you've only really got 1 hit at it. 2 hits at it in Q3, and he didn't get the lap together. And that is something that they need to work at. So, and it could have been so close for Oscar, because Oscar said going into that final corner, he was 2 tenths down and he decided to push it a bit more than he had done in the past, and he managed to get the lap out of it. But that could have gone either way. He could have pushed it just that little bit too much, had the lock up and lost the lap time as well. So Oscar just managed to get his sectors together and get that, ideal lap time out of the car. And Lando didn't get that. So they need to look at, on that side of the garage, how to get that lap all together from Lando. And it would have looked like a very, very different weekend for him. Obviously, the brake failure, separate issue. But his weekend would have looked a bit more positive, I would say.
Yeah, so just the old mistake here and there, Simon, and underlining how you need to be, to win a championship, you need to be perfect or near perfect every weekend, or just absolutely maximum no mistakes. And that's something Max has always been great at over the last 4 years, is that you can count on maybe 3 fingers how many mistakes Max has made over 4 years of winning championships. And, the odd mistake, as Bernie says, in qualifying. So the answer is nothing really was wrong with Lando. He just didn't get as good a, Oscar's two laps in qualifying were good enough. Both of his laps in Q3 were good enough for pole.
I think
Lando start was better.
Martin keeps talking about it, and when the governor starts saying things just quietly at the early stage of the season, that there's the sense there that at some point it's going to kick off, because I think we all agree now on the evidence of the first 2 races and of testing that this McLaren is the class of the field right now, and these two are going to be battling hard week in, week out. We are going to get something akin to, I'm not saying they're on the same level, but the Senna Prosts of the late 80s down there. And I think it's one of those inter-team battles, or intra-team battles, I should say, because that's within the same team, isn't it? That is going to keep us gripped, because I think that Oscar's he's always been like quite a serious cat, hasn't he? But he's got a real steely determination to him, and there's such contrasting characters, and I just wonder if at some point they're going to jar. At the moment they seem perfectly happy with each other, but it's just the insinuation from Martin that this one at some point the sparks are going to fly. Do you get the same sort of feeling?
Maybe. They're very different characters from Senna and Prost, and even Fernando Alonso and Lewis Hamilton in 2007 at McLaren. So previous McLaren intra-team battles. But, they're, all right, you might lazily media categorize Oscar Piastri as the quiet assassin, walks carefully through.
You calling me lazy?
House. No, one might, but carries a steel knife in his teeth. But
exactly.
Quietly. I'm talking about silly media constructs of what these people are like, and then Lando's more of a kind of carefree character. But I don't see why it shouldn't be good natured. Does it have to get nasty, Simon? Does it have to get?
I don't think it has to get nasty, but then. Again, going back to Martin saying, when there's a championship on the line, come on, the tensions are completely different from when you're chasing down a constructors like last year. I think that time will tell, won't it? And I think it depends on whether one of them, if they keep going, blow for blow like this, race by race, and we get to the summer break, then the tensions will ramp up even further. But if one of them gets a 50, 60 point lead, then then we're in a different situation, and we can call that one as we see it. But okay, let's move it on. That's where we are with McLaren. Where we are with Max Verstappen is once again showing just what a magnificent driver he is. And I know that that is a cliche, and I don't want to keep banging on about it, but it's rare that you see someone that outdrives or is at least on a par with the car, and then the other side of that garage, the curse of the Red Bull. Well, let's get on to both sides of the Red Bull garage, if we could. Start with Max, start with the positives and the fact that he's extracting, Bernie, absolutely every kind of last drop of what we can expect from that Red Bull out of it at the moment, whereas poor old Liam Lawson is, he doesn't know left from right at the moment or up from down. He just seems completely at sea, doesn't he?
Yeah, so Liam is a bit sad looking, if we put it like that. And, the performance didn't look great from either race weekend so far. 7/10 off in Q1. It's you can't really look at the end of the qualifying session, because obviously Max gets improvement through Q2 and Q3, but 7/10 of Q1 enough to put them at very different ends of the grid. I think from Max's side, Max is very, very strong. He gets the most out of the car, like we just discussed with McLaren. He puts the lap in when it matters. He very rarely makes mistakes. He generally out-qualifies others who make mistakes, really. You can't really say out-qualify the car, but he gets that, the best lap together when it matters. And even in racing when it matters, he manages to pull it out. I think that the difficulty they have as a team. And, there was a very interesting, in my opinion, interview with Christian Horner on Friday. Natalie sort of pushed him on team development, for et cetera. And he said that, yes, unfortunately, the team had, he didn't say unfortunately, I've added that. He did say that the team had followed the direction of their fastest driver in developing the car. And now they have a car that's quite tricky to drive, that lots of other people cannot get on top of because it is so nervous, twitchy. Now Max can handle that. That's the development direction they've gone. How difficult is it for them to come out of that? Are they ever going to get that second seat working? Should they have done something like Mercedes did in giving Kimi Antonelli all the driving in a 2-year-old car to get used to how the car operates, the characteristics of the car? Looking at it now, in perfect hindsight, Vision 2020, Liam would have really benefited from driving that Red Bull, which we think is very different in characteristic to the RB. Liam's performance in the RB was not dissimilar to Tsunoda, for example, and now he's at a point where he's qualifying 20th in the grid and the RB looks quicker. And even Max came out and said he'd be quicker in an RB. So it's a lot of big questions. I won't answer.
So many questions, Bertie, but this is what I found for the last 5-6 years, and we've always discussed this. Is you think that he's got rid of Gasly, he's got rid of Albon. Daniel Ricciardo's the one that effectively started or put the curse on that second Red Bull, and Checo. Do we owe him an apology? You think with this, as you said, he's not done 9,000 kilometers in the kind of testing the previous car that Kimi Antonelli did in a couple of year old. Mercedes prior to getting into the seat, but he has, Liam Lawson, did do 11 races. So if that was his kind of testing program, he's had plenty of time to get himself ready. But as we know, I just wonder, how is a car so difficult for a driver to drive in that second part, or the other side of the garage from Max Verstappen? He says that the window is so narrow that only Max can operate within that window effectively. And there's going to be no hiding place for Liam Lawson. And when Christian Horner, I think his silence spoke volumes, didn't it? But, he said we've got 400 engineers looking through 600 sensors that are on the car, all that sort of data. He ain't going to be able to hide Liam Lawson if the data says something else. So do we expect, on the evidence of what we've heard so far, that the change is imminent and that potentially Yuki is going to come in for his home Grand Prix in Japan?
I don't know, for two reasons. No, I don't. They'd be crazy to replace Lawson for Japan because Lawson knows Suzuka like the back of his hand, and is clearly going to be better. He'd never driven in China, Lawson. Yeah, and it's a really tricky. Yeah. It's a really tricky track, and Australia. It's a really tricky track to get the best out of. And you say he's sort of. How much behind is he from Verstappen? Well, he's 7/10. You said it, Simon. He's 7/10 behind Verstappen, which isn't years in Formula One, but it is the years in Formula One this year because the pack is so tight. And that's why he's qualifying and hasn't got out of Q1. But I just wonder whether Red Bull could diffuse the whole situation by saying, do you know what? We made the commitment. We got to where we got to with Checo. That's the past. So don't, we can apologize to him if you want, but that's what happened last year. We made the commitment to Liam. We're going to follow through with it. If it means we finish further down in the Constructors' Championship, maybe 4th this year, so be it. But it's the Drivers' Championship we're going after. Liam, we're going to help him. We're going to help him get up to, more respectable performances that he's happy with. But it's the Drivers' Championship we're after, and we're still going for that with Max, because while Oscar and Lando, as we've already said, are going to be taking points off each other, Max will be our focus, and with Ferrari dropping points already. And it's just really Max versus George for who's going to challenge the McLarens. And I think Red Bull could take the pressure off Liam by saying, do you know what? We're backing our guy. Of course, we're not going to get after him. Of course, we're not going to get rid of him.
All right. Well, what about this then? In that, if you took it all the way back to the middle of last year, there was a potential. Is this what I'm saying? Is this of Dr. Marco and senior management and Christian Horner and everybody? Is it of their making? They had an opportunity potentially to put someone like Carlos Sainz in the second Red Bull. He's not going to have potentially. You'd think he's of a capability. I know he struggled a little bit at the start of this year. You know, it keeps happening, and wasn't the evidence there that Yuki has the experience at the very least? He has the experience and has been driving very well, admittedly, at the beginning of this year, and therefore probably that's why we're having this discussion, despite the fact that he keeps finishing outside of the points. There have been flashes of him being quick, but I suppose the point is, and it's to both of you this one, Bernie, so you can take it as well. I mean, is this of their own design for Red Bull?
You always create your own problems. That's life. If you make decisions and you make bad decisions, then that's why you create problems for yourself. But that's all of us, right? All of us do that. With the Yuki situation, is twofold. First of all, they feel the reasons they didn't give Yuki the drive are still the same reasons, that he would suffer worse under Max Verstappen in the very particular car Max has to drive, that Yuki would be less equipped to deal with that than Liam Lawson. That's what they feel. And secondly, they still need somebody to be pulling in the points and pulling in the performances for Toro Rosso, right? So that team Racing Bulls needs to be scoring points, because that's also part of the Red Bull where they get their money from prize money. So you need to have a strong leader, and that's where they credit Yuki at Racing Bulls, and that's why they don't really want to pull him out of it, because then where do you go? I mean, who would you replace? I mean, Lindblad's not quite old enough, doesn't meet the requirements yet.
No.
But maybe Christian's waiting for Arvin Lindblad to replace Liam Lawson, but that's not going to happen until later in the year, is it?
I think they're in big trouble. I think that they should have looked at the younger talent and said, who is the most forward aero balance? That's what we believe the characteristic of that car is. It's very on the nose, we would call it. Very different to the RB characteristics. So they should have looked at who's driving of their young drivers closest to that spectrum. They're the one that's going to succeed the most. They should have maybe put all of them in an old Red Bull for a day and said, okay, who can get the best lap time out of this car? That's one metric of doing it, because the RB is fundamentally different. You know, people that have failed in the Red Bull, Albon's a great example, is driving brilliantly in the Williams, you know, and arguably if you offered him the Red Bull seat again, he might not go back, because that car is not to his liking and has probably got worse in the last few years. If Max leaves or doesn't show up at a race, they are currently the 10th fastest team. You know, and I was criticised last year for saying when Checo was there that if Max didn't turn up for a race, they were the 4th fastest team. But at the minute, they're 10th fastest. So your championship position for constructors is based on both cars. That's how your employees are paid their bonus. Like, it will start to become very detrimental within that team that people are looking at being 4th or 5th or wherever they end up in the constructors if they cannot get that second seat working. And we've had multiple years now of that second seat not working. And that's what the cleaners paid their bonus on. Whatever. That's how everyone in the factory tends to be paid their bonus, and people will start to think, well, we're not doing as well as a team, because Max's championship's really important to Max and maybe Christian and maybe others in the leadership team at Red Bull, but not so much to the people on the ground, because the people on the ground are paid via a different metric.
Yeah, it says so much, doesn't it, about Max's driving style and how different it is, how unique it is to, you know, you compare them actually when you look at the ones that he has seen off. You know, you look at what Alex Albon is doing now to Carlos Sainz. You know, Gasly is clearly a talented driver, and we've seen that, you know, bursts from Checo as well. So, and anyway, it's one of the great conundrums, isn't it, to the curse of the second Red Bull seat. But they've got
to give him some time. They've got to tell the likes of you, me, Simon. They've got to tell the likes of you, me, Natalie, Bernie, you know, Karun, give over. Stop giving him a hard time. Yeah. We're with him. We've made our choice. We've made our bed. We're going to lie in it. We're going to give him at least half a season. It's this not committing to Liam that arguably might be making things worse.
Well, you pointed out last week on that thing. I mean, it's not, you know, it isn't fair on Jack Doohan. It isn't fair on Liam Lawson when, you know, they get their massive opportunity in Formula One, and then already there is the media pylon. I know that's going to sound sort of hypocritical, basically based on the last 10 minutes of chat that we've had, but that's essentially what it is. You know, if you, it is just such a brutal environment at the moment, and there are people in senior management positions, as you're saying, at particular teams that take no prisoners and they make the decisions, don't they? And therefore we shall see, and we'll watch this space. A quick one on Mercedes before we finish off and get into some fans' questions. George Russell, a lovely advert popped up on my Instagram this morning of him in a garden playing with various cordless power tools. Have you seen it yet? In a nice pair of chinos and a shirt, as George would, but kind of, it was just very, very well done by George. Great acting skills. I urge you to look this up. But
I want to know what is it about your algorithm that presents you with this? Do you like those sort of extreme? Do you like those extreme mowing accounts on Instagram where very satisfying, like a satisfying video, the guy goes and. Yeah, like the guy goes and mows people's yards, and it's very satifying. You get the before and after. Is that why these the algorithms present?
I don't know what
George
it is,
Russell
but it
pruning
is
hedges.
time. Yeah, it could be that. I mean, I am absolutely loath to get my cordless lawnmower out at the moment because we've got an 8-month-old puppy, so the back lawn is not a place that you venture into.
I mean, maybe it's old age that's presenting the algorithm.
Exactly. Unless I'm wearing Wellington boots and carrying a black bin bag, I ain't going anywhere near my back garden at the moment. But that's for probably another discussion. But anyway, apart from his power tools and gardening credentials, who was saying that the traction out of turn 12, it was like a dragster, that Mercedes. And I love the way that George Russell has started this year. He's such a friendly bloke. He's one of the few drivers, of the top drivers, that'll always stop and say something. He'll always stop and have a chat if he's got a bit of time. He's not always rushing with his head down between the garage and the motorhome. And the way he started like a proper team leader this year. Kimi's obviously, showing flashes of brilliance, and he was driver of the day for some reason. But George must have been close to that because it's another podium for him. And I just love the demeanor of the Brit this year. He seems very cool, very calm, very collected. And if he just keeps on racking up the podiums, who knows where he could end up.
He's obviously trying to sell you power tools if he stops and chats with you so often, Simon.
I think he is, yeah. And I'm in the market.
A particularly good hedge trimmer he can suggest to you. And not to mention the strimmers. I think it was very solid. He knows how to win championships, George. He knows this championship is potentially still up for grabs. He knows by being on the podium at every race, at every Grand Prix, you will be in the mix for a championship. If you are on the podium at every Grand Prix, you will be, no matter what car you're in, even if you're not in a McLaren, you'll be in contention come the last quarter of the season. And that's what he's trying to do. The only thing I'd say is that I said this in a glib way as a kind of Eddie Jordan joke with why couldn't George catch an ailing Lando Norris with no brakes towards the end of the race. Obviously, Lando was managing his pace, so that's the reason. And Lando had built a gap, which is good. You always need to build a gap because you never know as a driver when you're going to need a gap to rely on, having no brakes. But I went back and listened to the team radio. It's available on the internet, and listened to it. And they don't tell George. The only message they have, unless that team radio, which says full team radio of George Russell, has been edited, the only message they get to George, apart from he can see Lando ahead of him being much closer, is that Lando might have a potential brake problem. They're not saying, Bernie, I want to hear what you think about this. They're not saying on the radio, OMG, George, Lando says he has no brakes. We think he's telling the truth. We think this is not a McLaren ploy. Go hell for leather, Strat 2. Give him Strat 5, which is, not quite as good as Strat 2. Qualifying spec, go for it. You can get the second position. There wasn't that urgency on the radio. I mean, obviously, like George can see him ahead, but they only said Lando might have a potential brake issue. They didn't say, he's got no brakes. Go get him.
So I wonder between them, they've just decided that when they say he's got a potential issue, then, it's up to him to push on and get get it done. But yeah, I do agree with you, Ted. And the thing from the GPS is so good now on how much the teams use a GPS. You can see in the lap times for the last few laps, Norris struggling. You can hear the conversation about the pedal going long. You can hear that he's told he's got basically no rear brake circuit, which is, definitely going to hamper overall performance. And from the GPS trace, you should be fit to see how much he's losing going into every corner in those final few laps, and it degraded lap on lap. So the teams all have the capability to do that. So there should definitely have been the knowledge base within Mercedes to say this is going to get critical pretty quickly, even in those last few laps. Sometimes from an engine side, the engine knows it's on the later laps of the race and will start to deploy more, even if they don't change the strat mode anyway, because they'll try and finish the battery at zero. So it will start to gradually run down because the engine knows how many laps are left of the Grand Prix. So that is one possibility as to why they didn't do that. But George was so close because Bortoleto was in the middle as a lapped car. And I think if he'd not been there as a lapped car into the final few corners, George could have got him. But Bortoleto was given a blue flag coming into turn 14, but didn't get out of the way immediately, as he does not have to. Yeah. And I think that if he had not been there, then George would have much more had it between his teeth. But you're right. The team, I think it's on them to say, this is critical. He's quantify it. We were always taught in McLaren, quantify it. He's losing 4/10 a lap, 5/10 a lap, whatever, each lap tell him what he's down on his delta. And the last lap was, the last few laps were significantly slow for Norris. So he should have been, and, maybe there is an aspect that he can see that ahead of him, but he was always good to say it.
Yeah, good outlap strategy in qualifying. Split the McLarens, didn't he? Piastri kind of squeezed him at that first corner and allowed Norris around the outside, but Antonelli held that floor damage and still drove really well, actually, but to finish in sixth. Honourable mentions as well. I think we've got to give them to Alex Albon, who's in the points again. He started particularly well and is currently sixth in the championship. And the two Haas cars inside the top 10. Quite enjoyed Ollie Behrman chowing everybody as he went past them over team radio. But good to see him bounce back after Australia and how that started for him. It was showing signs of his encouragement.
Yeah, no, good for him. And a very, very honourable mention to Esteban Ocon as well. P5 in the Haas. Arrested the attack on him in terms of grid pace by Ollie Behrman. So that's going to be a really, really interesting battle could get quite spicy between Ocon and Behrman in qualifying. So Ocon gave himself the position to be challenging in the top 10, and with the Ferrari and the Gasly exclusions, end up fifth in a Haas. Brilliant stuff from Ocon.
Yeah, amazing. Right, let's move on to some questions. How did Ferrari go from almost winning the Constructors? I know we've discussed a lot of this in 2024 to making such a bad start to 2025. That's from Salasin0203. I think we've kind of discussed that. That's just for a range of issues. But anything to add to what we've discussed so far?
Well, it looked very different without the two disqualifications, wouldn't it? Their championship position. Despite having a bad Australia this week would have helped with that a little bit. If not, have to fight another day. And triple header will be very telling by the end of that.
Yes, better it happens at the start of the season, having both your cars disqualified, Simon.
Andy Ford says, what kind of calibrated tool are they using to see 0.5 millimeter on a plank of wood on the Ferrari? That tool I would love to see. I.e., how do they work it out? I mean, honestly,
watch the notebook, and it turns out watch the notebook, and it turns out that you can see them actually doing it. It's effectively like running a roller underneath a touring car. It's they've got something that goes to the bottom, the reference plane, which would be in this case the floor of the car, and then it has to skim. Has to be to 9 millimeters, has to skim the bottom of the plank. And if there's a gap between it, if you can fit that Sky Sports News presenter's Sky ID card in between that little gauge, then you know that it's 0.5 millimeter off or whatever it was.
Got this, another one in from, I think it's his real name, Dave Crumpet in Newton Abbott, who asks the question, what's going on with Carlos Sainz in the early part of this season?
There was an internet rumor. I don't know whether I should go here with the internet rumors, but I did hear something that it's to do with the chassis that Williams are using. So what Williams did confirm to us over the winter was that they're using the tubs from last year, because they don't need, if they were to make under budget restriction, they want to keep some money for aero development. They don't need to be making new tubs, because if they did, they'd be largely the same as the ones they used towards the end of last year. And there's some rumor online amongst the Spanish press that Carlos isn't happy with his tub from last year and wants them to make him a new tub. That can often happen, can't it, guys, with drivers who aren't in form for whatever reason? So that's completely unsubstantiated. But let's see if it turns out that Carlos, when we get to Japan, and I'll ask him, is there something about this tub that doesn't feel right? And by contrast, is there something about Albon's tub that is newer or feels better or something? That's the only thing I've got to go on. Bernie, anything on Sainz?
Yeah, so well, I've got nothing to go on. I've got none of that intel that you have. But to pick up on what you said, Ted, the different tubs will have different mileages, and the tub is made of carbon. It's a carbon component generally with some inserts put in there. So there can be discrepancies in the build of it, slight discrepancies, either the build or the machining of it. That means that as the main part of your car, there might be some twist in the chassis or something like that drivers often pick up on, but it's past inspection, for example. Particularly if it's done a load of mileage already or had some sort of impact, which obviously a number of the Williams chassis did at various points last year. And it would still be cheaper, I think, for the Williams to build a totally new chassis. They can take some inserts out of it than it is to design a new chassis. So they maybe can get away with that. Some of that. There's probably a spare. I can't believe that they've just got two. So maybe in between this and the triple header, they can switch from his current chassis to the spare one that they should have somewhere. So maybe there's something that they can do there. But I have a question, if I can, Simon.
Well, hang on. Sorry, Bernie. But something needs to happen, Simon. Sorry, because Sainz is yet to score, isn't he, Simon? I'm not wrong on that. And that's not something's not.
No. He's got 1 point. He's got 1 point.
Oh yes, because with the disqualification. Yeah. Yes, he scored a point, didn't he? So that was good. I mean, all right, okay. I suppose that's that burden off his shoulders, but Carlos Sainz is better than this. Come on, that's something for the triple header that they need to go, because you listened to his radio after the race and he said, I'm quicker than this. So something's not working out, and none of us want to see that, because we all appreciate Sainz's quality. Sorry, Bernie. Yes. What were you going to ask me?
Well, so based on the canteen that we have over the race weekend at Sky, I want to know, what was your favourite crisp flavour of all of those that you tried?
Simon,
were they not Western crisps? Were they not Western crisps?
Bernie's only asking me this, Simon, because we had a trip to the local supermarket, and there were, in between some excellent dried mushrooms, dried Chinese mushrooms, there were some cucumber flavored crisps, and you know what? They tasted amazingly exactly like cucumber. It was so impressive. Sometimes you get crisps that don't exactly taste like they're advertised. But these, I mean, my hat's off to the crisp manufacturers of Shanghai and Eastern China, because they've got that taste. It's exactly like cucumber. It's exactly like cucumber. It's like putting a crispy, deep-fried cucumber in your mouth and eating it. It's incredible.
But cucumber doesn't taste of anything.
That's a different matter. I didn't say anything about how they tasted. I said all they tasted was exactly of cucumber. So the answer, Bernie, is cucumber-flavored crisps. What a marvelous modern world we live in.
That's about it from this edition of the F1 show, I think. You've got to get a flight now, another flight, Bernie? A little bit of spring skiing.
A little bit of last-minute skiing. So I've come home, I've discarded my China clothes very abruptly, managed to turn around the suitcase in less than 24 hours. I've not managed to turn around the jet lag as quickly. I was awake at 3 a.m. But I'm hoping that helps me get on the slopes nice and early tomorrow. But let's see.
Good. All right. Well, Ted, you can go and practice your notebooks in Camden and do on the school run, right? You practice on that. Make sure you can improve on your D- effort. I'm going to go and hack at my hedge with one of George Russell's well-advertised power tools. We'll be back on Tuesday of next week as we look ahead to the Japanese Grand Prix, which gets underway the following Thursday, not the following Thursday, well, the following Thursday from here. So that is the 3rd of April, the first of a triple header, which then takes in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. Thanks for your company, Bern. Thanks for your company, Ted. And we'll speak to you early next week.
San Diego.
Bye-bye. Yeah.